and view the file. Pardon? It's your home directory /.aws. And by the way, you can edit these files directly. You don't, if you want to change your output from JSON to table, you can edit the config file and it'll automatically change. You don't have to rerun the AWS config command. You can also add for different accounts, default. We're only using default, but to use, if I broke it down like they wanted to and had a different one for Route 53, EC2, S3, etc., I could have different sections in there and just add a tag onto my command for which user I want to use. But for what we're doing today, we don't need to do that. All right, the services we're going to go through today: VPC, EC2, RDS, S3, Route 53, and IAM. When we get to Route 53 and IAM, I'm only going to show some very basic stuff. To do anything further, as I mentioned earlier, would involve creating JSON files and just so many different options that I can't do it in this short period of time. The same with IAM. And actually it starts, you can set permissions on S3 files and buckets, etc. from the command line, but that takes more in depth than we have time for. I'm going to spend a lot of time on VPCs and EC2. That's where the bulk of this is going to be. RDS, S3, and the others are going to be rather fast because of that. So, VPCs. Now, yes, Amazon gives you a default VPC, which is configured and may not be what you're looking for. So we're going to create our own VPC. We're going to add an internet gateway. We're going to add a NAT gateway. The NAT gateway we probably won't use, or we won't use today, but it's good to have for your private instances that may need access to internet. If it's kind of what I was getting at last month when I was talking about DMZ, public and private. So the command to do it is AWS EC2 create-VPC --CIDR block, and then you can choose whatever private IP space you want. They'll need to. The slides are just the commands. I haven't drawn anything, so I thought about it, but again, I finished at 1 o'clock this morning. so yeah, job hunting kind of wasn't conducive to me doing this. I appreciate it. Okay, so the line below it you see is the output that the command gives you. The DOPT-0E blah blah blah, that is I forget what that is, so never mind. Sorry. The VPC, I was looking for the VPC-FE. That is your VPC ID. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the company that I left last month, we had in our AWS account, we had 40 some odd different VPCs, one for every customer, and that way all the data was kept separately. So next, and the VPC-FE, that's, you want to copy and paste that somewhere because that will come up at least 2 or 3 more times. Then you want to tag your VPC. So AWS EC2 create tags, then dash dash resources, followed by the ID of whatever resource you're wanting to tag. In our case, it's the VPC ID. Dash dash tags, and then you have key equals name comma value equals whatever you want to call it. Please note there are no spaces in that bottom line in the key equals name value AWS blah blah blah. There are no spaces. It will give you an error if you put a space in there. So that was done on purpose. Otherwise, it wouldn't have wrapped quite that badly. And that is one command. I will mention when command wraps, because I didn't put a backslash in there because I am a horrible human being. Are we streaming? Okay. Okay. Well, they've got the. We're getting into the meat of it now, so y'all didn't miss much. All right. Next, you want to create a subnet. Yeah. The name value. It can be whatever you want. It's just a tag. It's a reference point for that item. Yeah, they're not unique. I could create another VPC and give it the exact same name, and it just shows my stupidity, and it won't stop me. So next, we're creating a subnet. In this case, I'm going to make this subnet public. That's why it says public subnet. We're essentially going to do this command twice with a different CIDR block. Yeah. That's just the output of the command itself. Some come out. That's about the only one. If you go to the next slide, the public subnet, the output is JSON. So the only time they give you that cryptic output is with short commands like that. That kind of obvious. Yeah, in the JSON one, it comes out and gives you a better description of what it's doing. All right. Also notice in the public subnet, the state is pending. It takes anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute for the VPC to be created and then usable. Um, so if you can describe subnet, I think that's one of the choices, and it'll tell you when it's up, but it doesn't take very long. Again, we're going to tag our subnet, and you'll see this command several times because if you're in the web console, it is really, really handy to have these things tagged so you know what a subnet is without having to dig in and reference what you decided to make subnet 7D54B907. If that's the only defining thing, you're not going to know what you've done. So tagging is very, very helpful, and tags are just references, so as we said before, a tag does not have to be unique. And in this case, I tagged it CLI public. And then I have the private subnet, which is, I didn't put the output for because you've seen the command already. Same command, the only difference is instead of a 10.0.1.0 network, I've got 10.0.2.0 network. And I've created the CIDR to keep them as separate subnets. And then again, tag your subnet. So are we all, those following, caught up? A CIDR block is your network address, your network block. So in this case, it's like Do you go back far enough in networking that you understand Class A, B, and C networks? So a CIDR block of 24 is a Class C network. A CIDR block of 16 is a Class B, um, and it all has to do with net masking. The CIDR block translates to a specific net mask. In this case, it would be 255.255.255.0. And a CIDR of /16 would be 255.255.0.0. That makes sense? Cool. All right. So now you have your two private and public subnets. We'll create the internet gateway because the only address that's going to have, or the only subnet that's going to have direct access to the internet, to and from the internet, is your public. This internet gateway is only going to be attached to your public network. So you create the gateway with, conveniently enough, create dash internet dash gateway. And by the way, if you notice, the VPCs are all AWS EC2 commands. I would guess at some point it will become AWS VPC, but until they do, until they split them apart, it's VPC is part of the EC2 command structure. And you'll see in the output the internet gateway ID, which you will then need to, shockingly enough, tag your internet gateway. You may or may not need to tag it. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and a lot of this stuff can be scripted easily. You could, with this output, you could run that command, and then you could grep for internet gateway ID and awk for your IGW to then use in your tag. So it's I don't have any scripts at the moment. This weekend, after today, part of what I'm going to do is I was talking to somebody who's interested in. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to write a script to dynamically update my Route 53 with my home network address, so that instead of having to verify my host name with no IP or whatever dynamic DNS service I want to do, I can have my own homegrown one with my domain. And once I do that, I'm going to put it up on GitHub. And once I've done that, I will add my GitHub uh, address to the to this to the slides. So if you look back later on in the week, you'll hopefully see that. The other thing I'm going to do is the same thing with security groups, because when I create a new machine, I normally lock down security groups so that only my home IP address can SSH to it. And that way I can dynamically update. It'll update without me doing anything. So that will be fun to look out for if you're that much of a geek. Now, the important thing relating to what Peter said is attach your new gateway to the VPC. And this is attach internet gateway. That way the VPC sees your gateway and it can relate to it. There's no output to this. There's nothing to tag. So it's just connecting the two within AWS. The second thing, and while I include this here. We're not going to need it today. It's creating a NAT gateway. And to do that, you will need an elastic IP address, which is the first thing you'll do. You set the domain to VPC, and that way it's not dependent on an actual EC2 image to work. The output, it gives you the allocation ID, which you'll want to copy because you'll need it in a second. It gives you the domain level and then your public IP address. And that is the equivalent of your home IP. To put it into perspective, that becomes your home IP for anything in the anything that you have in the NATed subnet. So in that private subnet, things will any inbound traffic or outbound traffic will see that IP address as the originating IP. Then you create your NAT gateway. Okay. Once you've allocated the address, you create your NAT gateway. You attach it to your private subnet, and then you use the allocation ID that I mentioned before. Yeah. Network Address Translation is what NAT stands for. And what it is um, using your home as an example. If you go to gotomyip.com or whatsmyip.com, sorry, and it gives you that IP address. As far as anyone in the outside world, when you're making a web request, that request is coming from that IP address. And then it comes in and NAT will translate that public IP address to the private IP address assigned by your internet router. So it translates your private IP space to that public IP address and back. Does that make sense? Okay. And that's essentially what we're setting up here. Again, we're not going to use it today. You'd probably want to, when I set up RDS, you would probably want to put it into the NATed subnet because you don't want RDS to be public necessarily. So that's a good candidate. Or put it into a totally private IP space is actually what I would do. I'd create. I didn't have time, but I create a third one that's just totally private with no outbound access at all, and that would be RDS. Anything else you'd do that to, you'd have issues with updating and stuff like that. So that you might want to put it under the NATed, so you can go out and do a yum update or apt, whatever. All right, and then finally, tag your. Oh, I said gateway. I should have said private gateway, but or NAT gateway or something. But oh no, it does say NAT gateway. Am I pretty much staying in frame?
Well, right now I'm showing the slides.
Okay, that works. All right. Next, we need to create a route table. Route table is what we all know what route tables are used for? Okay. A route table tells uh, tells machines on that network how to route the traffic. So you'll have a route table that will route to the internet at large in your public space, or your private space will be everything gets routed to 10.0.2.0. So that's what the route table essentially does. And in this case, we're creating a route table for our VPC. And there's, as you can probably see, the output runs off the screen, so there's a lot more than what you have there. Again, you'll need the route table ID, which is at the very bottom, and And you'll do this twice. And the reason you'll do it twice is you need one route table for public and one for private. And also because I changed how I wanted to do the slide and I didn't delete the original. So that's why it comes up there twice. That's what happens when you finish something at 1 o'clock in the morning on the day of your presentation. You don't have time to go through and clean up silly crap like that. Um, so, but we did do it twice. Um, and we want to tag them, public and private, with each of the different IDs. Now, this one you'll only do once because you're creating your public route for it. So your gateway ID will be the gateway ID of the public gateway that you set up. And again, the route table ID, the same thing with that. Destination CIDR block 0.0.0.0/0 is the internet everywhere. So that is what will allow your public anything in the public subnet to hit the internet without restriction, outside of the restrictions of firewalls and security groups, whatever you have set up. And it gives you that really detailed output of return true. If it was return false, something broke, and I don't know what else it would give you, but at least you know it worked. The second thing, now we're creating a private route through your NAT. And this is what will allow your NAT servers in your NAT space to get out to the internet. Because the gateway ID is your NAT gateway. So that way you don't have to have a public IP address on any of those servers. Anything you build in the public space will need to have an external IP address. Anything in your NATed space only needs private, and that's where the difference comes in. And it's a layer of protection. Yeah.
You represent the entire internet, but 0.0.0.0, are you not being able to access anything given a IP6 address?
Everything here is IPv4. Um, I
There's a similar alias, right?
yeah, there is a similar one. And I've seen it so many times. I just have never cared enough to remember
Definitely
it.
have to do this every subnet if IPv6.
Yeah, you'd have to do this. Everything we've done with an IPv4, you would have to repeat and change your CIDR block to an IPv6. But again, that's probably stretching it for what I'm trying to do today. Okay. All right. So now the next is associate your subnet with the route tables. And that's, again, I don't think I tag these because it's just an internet association. Or an AWS association, so it doesn't care. Finally, we will create a security group. And in this case, we called the security group the web security group. This will be used when you create your EC2 instance in a little bit. So the group ID, you want to copy and paste that somewhere because it doesn't come up for a few slides. But we're putting it in place. And again, tag that puppy. And the and the value equals, it doesn't matter what you put in there. I just put whatever popped into my head, and I am not creative, so as you can see. Finally, you want to configure your security group. In these cases, we're allowing SSH and HTTP. In the case of HTTPS, you just change port 80 to port 443, and it'll come up the same. And again, you'll see in the SSH, just for this, because I don't think you want to set up your security group just to allow Red Hat Office. I gave it everything. When you get home tonight, go in and change, find out your home IP address and change it for security's sake, because you don't want your instances left open to the world for SSH, because that allows brute force attacks and difficult, but
Set up by default using passwords.
yeah, you've got keys, so that's true. But I still like to block it anyway because I'm paranoid. Next, we're going to create an SSH key pair. Much like your AWS access keys, you need to protect this because these are the keys to your EC2 instance kingdom and anything attached to that EC2 instance. So treat it like you would any normal SSH key pair. The command is EC2, AWS EC2 create key pair, key name, whatever you want to call it. Um, and if you notice, I have two versions of the same command. The top version will output the contents of your private key into the command output, which then you have to copy and paste. But it's an example of what it looks like. Um, a better way to do it would be to do the command query key material, which is, if you see above, is the JSON tag for the public key. Output text, because you don't want your public key to be output in JSON or in a table format, because that doesn't help. And then your the public key file. Um, Even though it says RSA somewhere in there, um, it is actually ECDSA, and don't ask me what that stands for. I haven't cared enough to remember.
Like this license private key, it is the public key, you said.
Well, actually, when this gets created, Amazon maintains the public key. You don't see the public key. To get it, you'd have to log into an instance and grab it. It only gives you the private key.
Just like any other any key then.
I don't understand why they do that, but it's not like when you grab it from do it from command line, it gives you a PEM file, whereas this doesn't. So there's a slight difference, but it only gives you that is only your private key. Your public key, uh, Amazon holds somewhere, and then when you create your instance, it throws your public key into the authorized key file. I'll explain that in a second. So again, protect that like you would your private SSH key. Yeah,
ECDSA, I don't think you store segmented outbound.
I'll take your word for it. And thank you, Google. Yeah.
When does it show up in the AWS interface all of a sudden?
Um, it should show up immediately, pretty much. It'll be there immediately. Whether it's usable is a different thing. What's not showing up?
Like the public and private nets, I don't see the segmented interface.
Um, oh, I forget. It should show up. Subnet should show up in the VPC,
Okay.
and then on the left, subnets. It won't show up. The stuff we did for VPC will not show up in the EC2 console interface. There is a separate VPC console page.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, and if you go back, if you see me after this, I'll give you the bit.ly URL for last month's, which I did. Last month was all command line, or all web console. Okay. All right, so that, as I was saying, protect that AWS CLI blah 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 file as you would any SSH key file, because that's your access to your EC2 instances. I can talk. Um, I thought I put it in notes and I can't see my notes right now. That's why I'm not mentioning the private public key. But as I was telling Peter, the public key you don't get in that fashion. You actually, when you create your EC2 instance, you'll have to log in and look at authorized keys to pull in your public um, your public uh, key file. It would be nice if Amazon gave you that, but they don't, and for whatever reason. Um, now the real fun part: EC AWS EC2 run instance. Um, this will require a little bit of research that you'll need the web console for if you go beyond what we're doing today. If you see the image ID, that is the ID of the AMI that we're using to create this instance, which I believe is a rel 7 AMI. If your company has their own AMIs, you can create your own AMIs. You'll need to have that, and that you'll really have to go through the web console to get an AMI ID. Um, and so I went ahead and searched that, and there it is. Uh, the dash dash count one, that will create a single EC2 instance. If you want to create 10 of them, change that to 10 and you'll have 10 EC2 instances, and in 3 days you'll be out of free tier for the month. Um, the next one, dash dash disable API termination. You can, when you create an EC2 instance, you can enable what's called termination protection. That prevents you from accidentally terminating your instance. There have been a couple of times where that wasn't set, and I accidentally deleted an instance that I really wanted to keep, and I was mad. So I always do that regardless. Instance type T2 micro. That's the largest instance type in the free tier. You can have a T2 micro or a T2 nano, and we went over that last month as to what the sizes are. Key name, you've got AWS CLI key. That's the key we just created in the last slide, and that's what will put your public key into authorized keys. Security group, as I'm group IDs, and you'll notice some of these tags are plural and some are singular. I have absolutely no idea why Amazon does it that way. I do know that you can have an instance in multiple security groups, so that may be what decides it, is when you can have more than one, and I believe they'd be comma separated, but I'm not 100% sure. Your subnet ID, in this case, it's your public subnet. And then finally, associate public IP address. Otherwise, you can't get inbound traffic. So that's kind of important, especially for your public instances as well. You will have all kinds of output. Um, and I didn't scroll down. You'll want to keep track of your instance ID because you'll need that in a second to tag that instance. Um, and there are a buttload of other tags you can put on there. Um, that will just give you a basic machine setup with the AMI you want. Any questions? We good? And those following along, have you been able to change the stuff you've needed to as we go? Are you alright? Yeah, there is you do have to go through and change some of the stuff. I if some of the commands weren't as big as they are, I would have put them as references, with blocks for where I have my stuff. But they aren't. All right. The one thing about a public IP address as assigned is anytime you restart your instance, you will get a brand new public IP address. The way to prevent that is to add an elastic IP address. Elastic IP addresses are chargeable. They charge like a penny an hour or something like that. So if you're going to use this and you want to keep it consistent, you want to add an elastic IP address. You also want to be sure to delete that elastic IP address when your EC2 instance goes away, or all of a sudden you'll get a charge on your credit card and you won't know why. They do in this case, even though technically the elastic IP address is not allocated to an instance and they technically charge you a penny, they won't bill you for a penny. They do kind of use common sense for a larger company. I think if you're under like 5 hours, then they don't care. They're not going to charge you for it. I'm not sure what their threshold is, but you're not going to get charged a penny for doing this. So once you've allocated the IP address, it will give you the allocation ID and your public IP address, two handy pieces of information. The allocation ID will be used in that next command, associate address, and that will associate your elastic IP address to the EC2 instance that we just created. And the network interface ID that came when you created the instance. That's in there in that output. And then finally, tag your elastic IP address, because if you need to go through, if you have more than one instance and you need to go through and delete elastic IPs that are no longer associated, it helps to have a name for it so you know what it is. We doing all right? Are you almost caught up? All right. If you have any questions and you need me to go back a little bit, let me know. And now you can SSH to your new instance. So obviously you need to change the permissions of your public key file and the location of it. So wherever you know put it in your home directory .ssh is the common place for it. Pardon me. And then SSH -I, your file, key file, and then L. We went over last time if it's an Ubuntu instance, the default username is Ubuntu. And that does show up in the output, I believe, when you created the EC2 instance. Otherwise, if you SSH as root, it'll give you an error and tell you what user that you should be logging into. But in this case, it's EC2-user. And that's the most used default ID. It's for any Red Hat based or Amazon Linux machine. You can also reboot your instance from the EC2 command line, and that's just simply AWS EC2 reboot instances and the instance IDs, and that will restart your machine, your instance. Finally, If you want to terminate your instance, first you need to turn off termination protection, because that's what it's there for, is to force you to have that extra step. So you want to modify instance attribute, and that instance attribute is no disable API termination, and then your instance ID, and that will remove um, the termination protection. I didn't put both commands on the slide because, boom, there's a lot of it. A little more output, and I couldn't fit it on. So next you want to terminate instances, which is terminate-instance, and then the instance ID, and it will give you the status and information on what it's doing. And again, you want to remove the elastic IP address, so you want to, it doesn't matter if you do this step before or after you terminate your instance. If you do it before, you need to run that first command and disassociate the address from your EC2 instance, and then you can release that address and you won't be charged. I'm not sure. And when I say a penny a minute, that's the last time I actually made the mistake of forgetting an elastic IP address. It was a penny a minute. It could be more, it could be less. Okay, one thing I also completely forgot to put on here is once your instances are up, you can use the command AWS EC2 describe-instances. And that will give you, if you saw at when I was talking about the output formats at the beginning, that's the command I used, and that it gives you pretty much any piece of information you'd want to know about your instances. If you put nothing at the end of that command, it will give you that output for every instance you have running in your in the default region in your account. So if your default region is US East 2 and you have instances running in US East 1, you won't it won't show up. So you've got to specify the region, and that is true on all these commands. The configuration file, uh, the .aws/config file, those two pieces of information keep you from having to add that to every command. So if you want to run this command outside, in a different region, you do -- region US East 1 or AP Southeast 2, whatever the region name is. And the same with the output, which has shown up a couple of times. So, so that, I apologize. I'll if I think about it, I'll add that command to the slide tonight and a bit of an explanation. And I will do it before I do the delete instance slide, because you want to look at it before you delete the damn thing. It won't show you much now because it's gone. Alright, RDS. RDS is going to be rather short because there's not much you really need to do in the command line. The one thing that I did by mistake is I want to, there is a tag on there, and if you do the help, it'll tell you what it is for not making an RDS instance public. I want to keep all mine private. I don't want public access to it just because I'm me. So in this case, oh, no publicly accessible. I actually, by default, it will make an RDS instance publicly available. So you have to go in and add no publicly accessible. So the command AWS RDS create-db-instance. Um, the instance identifier, that's going to be your tag your name tag, so you don't have to separately tag your RDS instance. Allocated storage, that is gig. So for the free tier, you're allowed up to 20 gigs of storage for your databases. So therefore, why not make it go the whole hog, get all 20. And I think 20 is the default as well. Um, the DB instance class, again, DB T2 Micro is the free tier. I think they have a Nano as well, but that is so small, it is useless. So don't even try playing with Nano if they have. Um, then the engine, MariaDB, Oracle, MySQL, Aurora, which is Amazon's version of MySQL and is not eligible for free tier. SQL Server. um, it is available, unfortunately. And Postgres. PostgreSQL is very limited into what as to what it can do. If you're into Postgres, don't use RDS. You'll be better off with an EC2 instance and a full Postgres installation. Um, you'll see here getting important info about your instance. It does get that create command throws out a lot of information, and it's a pain in the ass to go through. So the things that you want to know the hosted zone ID. Uh, well, no, you don't care about that. You care about the address. That is the URL to access your or your database. If Even if you have your database as a private and not publicly available, you will need that URL to access your database from your within the private space. So that will resolve to its whatever its private IP address is. And then you want to make sure the port is correct. You can also specify the port in the command um, to do that. But if it's not publicly available, you may as well use the default port. And then once you've created, and it does take up to 10 minutes to create an RDS instance. I don't know why, but they take forever. And it's especially annoying if you built one by accident and you're waiting for it to build so that you can delete it. It is so annoying. Um, so the next is deleting. And again, at the end of that command, we've got skip final snapshot. Well, actually, let me step back. The DB instance identifier, if you notice in the command, I had mixed capitalization, but in this command, it's all lowercase. It is not case sensitive. So I actually didn't realize that until I did the delete command, and I didn't feel like changing the slide, so I didn't. Skip final snapshot. When you destroy, terminate, or whatever you want to refer to an RDS instance, it will by default it'll take a snapshot of the data in the final instance so that you can actually recreate that database later. Um, if you don't need that, because again, Amazon charges you for things you use, and if you use the space for a final snapshot, you get a small charge for it. Since I'm gearing all this towards free tier, and you all are cheap bastards and bastardettes like me, and you don't want to get charged, delete that final snapshot or skip final snapshot, and it'll delete that snapshot and any snapshots made while the instance was alive. So normally it'll do a backup snapshot every day, and it'll save 7 days worth, and that's free, but it'll delete those as well. Yeah, relational database service. So it is your database. Um, and there, there are 6 different database engines that you can choose from: Aurora, MySQL, Maria, Postgres, Oracle, and that other one that I refuse to name anymore. Yeah, yeah. Can you tell I love certain companies? I'm not a fan of Oracle either, but such is life. So that's the output. That's the start of the output from the deleting an instance. It goes on much further, and it gives you more information than you probably care about. Um, and again, it can take up to 10 minutes to delete or terminate an RDS instance, which again is annoying if you want to correct the mistake you made before and you want to give it the same name. You can't. So while this is shutting down, I can't name it AWS CLI DB because that already exists. It won't. The names have to be unique within your VPC or your account. So that's anything beyond that with databases. You can modify any of the things. You can modify, um, if you. Oh, I didn't finish the initial command. The master username is the admin ID for the database, and then the master user password is that fine secure password that I decided to make it, and that will be the username and password you'll initially access your RDS instance with. Um, all right, and all that will be included. You can change all that with modify DB instance, I think it is, and specific tags depending on what you want to change. So that's it for S3 that I'm going to be covering because I could, again, a lot of these things that I'm stopping on are because I could do a whole two. You can do a force command if something is using something in the bucket, or the force tag if something's being used using the empty bucket, but it won't delete all the contents. You can also sync a local directory, which is what on the personal side, I use S3 for some of my backups, and I use the sync command. That way, it only will sync changes. It won't throw the whole bucket, the whole directory up or down again, which saves you bandwidth because once you get out of free tier and if you're using S3 for something like that, you do get charged for bandwidth up and down. Free tier, I believe, if I remember from the last month, it's 5 gig of data free in S3. Some other commands for file manipulation. This is good for copying. This is along with sync. I should have put sync on this slide, but oh well. You can copy files between S3 and your local. You can also copy files between two S3 buckets. You can move them between two S3 buckets. Just instead of the local file or address, you need to have the two S3 URIs, and obviously you need to have the permission to do so. Moving files, the same thing. And then deleting files from S3, if you add -- recursive, it will delete all of the files in that directory structure. So if you're going to delete a bucket, you use the RM recursive on that bucket name. And in that case, it will tell you, unless you put a dash dash quiet, it will list every file as it deletes it. So if you like reading really fast and you have a lot of files, leave it off. Leave quiet off. And again, as I said, you can anything you can do in the web console, you can do from the command line. Just you have to it's a pain in the butt, and you've got to do a lot of manipulation and describing, etc. To get there, and it was beyond the scope of what I was doing today. Um, in file manipulation, here are some of the options. A lot of the AWS commands have an option called dry-run. And what that command does is it will tell you what the command was going to do and whether or not it would successfully do it. So if you want to make sure that a command is going to do what you think it's going to do, throw --dry run and it'll tell you. There's quiet and only -show -arrows errors, which should be self-explanatory. Either it shows nothing or it'll only show errors. If you say quiet and it has an error, it's not going to show you. Recursive follows a directory tree. You can, for include, if you say you only want to remove image files, so you can do the remove command recursive -- include star.jpg, and that'll go through and only remove JPEG files. Say exclude, the opposite. It'll do everything but remove everything but the JPEG files. And then page size is the number of lines to output. It only outputs 1,000 lines, and then the command will keep running. You just won't see any more output unless you change it. And as I said, 1,000's the default. So that's S3. Any questions, comments? Are you almost caught up? Okay. If you're not going to use it, and we're not going to do anything more with it today, so that works. All right. As I said, there is an exception for me talking about making a file public. You can sign a file, and what that does is that will give you a key signed URL, just as you would signing an email, to ensure it comes from you. You can also set an expiration date. So in the case of the file, the thing you have there, that access keylist.png file, if you clicked, you can't do it now because I did it last night, but if that URL were still active, you could click on it and see that PNG file. And you set a time limit. The time limit for availability is in seconds, so 7,200 seconds, 3 hours. And that's helpful if you want somebody to, you want to pass information to somebody because they can't get to that file with the shortened URL. They can't get to it just straight with an S3, command. Everything after that $sign in that first line of output is required. We used to use that at the job I came from to pass files to our customers. So we'd put a limit on it, and it was only available for that time. And as I mentioned, it's possible to set permissions, storage class, whether you want additional redundancy or less, and ACLs from the command line. And there's a link to using S3 to do that. Route 53. The only thing I'm going to really show you, the only thing I'm going to show you is listing hosted zones. The reason being, anything else requires dealing with JSON files and is a little harder to go through and a little more advanced. Once I've finished with the script and it's in my GitHub, that'll give you some examples if you want to see how that can be done. But this will list any domains that you have. You can change the comment pretty easily, but you're going to put that in when you create the domain anyway. Alright, IAM. A lot of the stuff you're going to do on IAM initially will be done in the web console just because it's going to be easier if you're learning IAM, it's easier to learn IAM from the web console than it is to do it on the command line. The stuff we're doing now is just some basic stuff. Like I said earlier, you can create an access key in IAM, and it gives you the output of that, and you want to keep the access key ID and the secret access key, and that's what you pass to the user. You can also delete the key using the access key ID. And as you might guess, I ran that command right after I created that key file that I made publicly available on my presentation. One thing you can also do with AWS is you can have multi-factor authentication, specifically using, everyone understands Google Authenticator. I use a different one called Authy because it allows multiple syncing across devices. So with the first one, you create the device, it will give you an output. The out file, CLI test.mfa.png, will give you the QR code to set up your multi-factor authentication. That's what you pass to the user or you scan yourself. Once it's done, you enable the MFA device, you assign it to whatever user. The only user you can't assign it to is your quote-unquote root account user. So to do this, you want to create, as you saw that list that I have for my account, I can assign an MFA to any one of those users with the MFA I created to these users. Authentication code 1 and authentication code 2 are after you've scanned the QR code into your authentication device. It's the next two 6-digit codes that come up. The first, obviously, authentication code 1 is the first one, and 2 would be the one immediately following. So if you're doing it for another user, it helps for the two of you to be, in the same area or communicating directly. There is a somewhat of a time lapse that it'll give you, but it's not very long. Okay, for what I'm going to cover, that's all that I've got. I mentioned before that Doug talked about SSM. He did that at the AWS DC meetup Thursday. That's a link to a slide deck. I'm working on. He also videotaped it with his new little toy, so I think he's going to put that up on YouTube. Also, during the presentation, he showed a short video of actually it in action, and hopefully he'll have a link to that as well. Systems Manager Services, or why they have the three-letter acronym in a different order than the name, I don't know, but essentially SSM is a configuration management tool within AWS. If you don't use Ansible or you don't use, Chef, Puppet, Salt, etc., you can use SSM. SSM is initially probably better to learn on the web console again. You can find SSM in the EC2 web console, left hand side all the way at the bottom. And I'll let you, if you want to look at that, I'll let you look through Doug's slides. Bless you. And it there are two things you can run command. You can use it to run commands. You can also store secrets in its container service. It is pretty cool. That was the first time I had heard of it Wednesday, or Tuesday, so I didn't really look through it. But it looks to me like it's essentially Amazon's configuration management tool. Yay, that worked well. So here's some information. I've got the free tier info and console login still there. Um, the AWS Commandline reference link is there. Um, I didn't really mention it, but the on the within the CLI command help is very good. Um, if you start with say AWS help, it will list out all the services that you can use like S3, SSM, RDS, and just a boat ton. Some of you have heard of Lambda. There's Lambda CLI. There's a good 40 or 50 different services that you can use through the CLI. And essentially what you do is you have whatever the command is, AWS help will give you that. AWS EC2 help will list out all the AWS EC2 commands. AWS EC2 command help will list help on that specific command. It is very good. When you get to the command level, they include examples as well, which are pretty basic, but they give you an idea of a starting point. I would start there before I'd hit the actual online command reference because it's more concise and a little easier to follow along. So that would be it. Any questions? I can get that, and I'll um, yeah, I think I just added dash CLI. Yeah, if you take off the dash CLI, I'm yeah, the CLI is all capitalized. Um, my initials, the I in intro, and AWS and CLI are all capitalized. Um, cool. I knew I'd do something semi-intelligent. Thank you. All right, so as I said at the beginning, I'm hoping to get somebody from GitLab to come and present next month. If not next month, in April. I'm hoping not April because I won't be here. Mark will be running it in April, but I'll try to find somebody to talk in April on something that I don't really care about. Yeah, I'm that selfish. So as I said, if there are any topics that you guys want to, as I keep saying, any topics you guys want to hear about, um, send me a message on Meetup, or if you want to come talk to me after, or email for those who don't use Meetup. I can't imagine they exist. Uh, so, anything else anyone wants to bring up, uh, about? Yes. No, cloud's a fad. Individual what? Um, I don't think the PC will ever disappear. I don't think personal computers will ever totally go away. Because there are going to be people like me who hate typing on a tablet. I absolutely abhor typing on my phone or my tablet. You know, my son hates it because I won't do things. I won't use things to communicate with him that are only phone based. Like Instagram used to be is only was or is, I don't care, only phone. I won't use it because I'm not typing on that little freaking keyboard. Um, so yeah, I don't think computers, you know, desktops are too easy to work on compared to a laptop. So desktops, there will always be a market.
If you're computing as a computer guy,
There you go. Now,
automation.
in an in an enterprise, cloud may take over enterprise, um, and that's what Amazon and Google and Rackspace and DigitalOcean want. They don't want you to go out and buy the hardware, but
And that is the trend.
yeah.
The trend is becoming why a lot of people trying to maintain a lot of hardware and they push the latest and greatest. When you build, it's great to go through Amazon or through Google or through GCP or something else.
Hey, that's a company we don't talk about. We don't talk about Azure.
Microsoft loves Linux, right? So
Yeah, my dogs never shit when I walk them.